Section 3. You said she was coming by mail. Why would she be at the airport? I knew better than to persevere with this discussion, but then I became curious. Who are we talking about? I dared to ask. That robot doll of yours. You said she would be coming soon. I knew my wife had tested the doors to her private insane asylum years earlier, when she had glued my broken dental plate back together with glue that contained cyanide. After breathing the fumes from the glue for 3 days and suffering from nausea, I finally asked her to show me the glue bottle. It had a warning in large black letters not to be used orally. A layman could make such a mistake, but she had been a senior nurse for 45 years. I had become hardened over the years with these mists of conversations that had no real grasp of reality. I find it pointless to argue with crazy people, as their intention in life is to make you believe you are the crazy one. Often they bring their equally delirious and self-righteous friends into the conversation as backup. Everyone loves my wife. They think that the sun reflects a glorious glow from her backside. I'm here to tell you that what you are seeing is an anal sphincter with no luminescent lighting whatsoever. She isn't a saint, but then my opinion carries little weight in her circle of broom-sweeping domesticated witches. One day, I was entering the kitchen carrying a raw steak on a plate when I found that I had stumbled into a meeting of 29 of her women friends, all over the age of 60, and spoiling for a fight with a man. They were all primed and ready for battle when I entered the room. Even the 3 stuffed witches my wife had dangling from the ceiling took on life forms. I made light of the situation and jokingly said, "Is this a private lynching or can anybody join in?" The deep, guttural growling that emanated from that room caught me by surprise, and all I could think of was that I needed something to distract them so that I could make good my escape before one of them turned me into a wart on a nun's bum. There's nothing more useless than that. All I had at my disposal was the steak lying on my plate, so I picked it up and flung it onto the floor in the middle of the mass of hyperventilating demons. When I came back to the kitchen some time later, my wife had picked up the steak, washed off the dirt, and placed it on a plate sitting on the counter. "I washed off the steak you dropped. Helen was good enough to bring it to me. It should still be okay to eat. I use the 10-second rule. If you remove it from the floor before 10 seconds, it doesn't have time to pick up bacteria." "How do I know one of them hasn't put a spell on it?" I questioned, examining it for signs of demon activity. "There's a parcel for you on the front porch," said my wife. "Is it your robot?" I went straight out and found a parcel the size of a book. How large did she think the robot was? The dimensions from AI were 5 feet 6 inches in height. At the end of 8 weeks of waiting, I sent an email to Robot AI asking when my delivery was coming. To my surprise, an email was sent back to me in 3 minutes, which goes to show they had received all my hundreds of inquiries over the 8 weeks, but had decided to ignore me. AI. "Your robot has been shipped," was all it said. Don. "Shipped where?" AI. "Not sure. Maybe Australia." Don. "When and which courier?" AI. "Go to Qantas Goods Received. Get a goods clearance certificate to collect your goods." Don. "What is a goods clearance certificate?" AI. No answer came. They were ignoring me again in the hopes I would give up. I gave up. I needed to go to the airport and sort this out. After a great deal of searching, I finally found an address for Qantas Goods Received. It seemed like a good place to start. I figured that it would be best to front up in person, as it could take hours on the phone. I was up early the next morning, full of hope, and still wondering why no one at Qantas had contacted me as to the arrival of my package. Was AI correct that my robot had arrived in Australia? Qantas is a big place, taking up several kilometres of space at the airport. The only paperwork I had with me was the original order form from AI that I had printed out. I was looking for a needle in a haystack. Only this needle could talk. The address given to me was 1142/Unit 272B Welshpool Road, Perth Airport. I found the road and came to 1142. The building was at least a kilometre in length, disappearing in a blurry haze off in the distance. I approached a gate that had a man manning it, looking important, holding a clipboard in his hand. He immediately jumped in front of my car, stopping me. He wrote down my licence number and then waved for me to follow him to a water tank. A sign in bright red lettering said, "Park on the yellow line and wait." I parked and was about to get out of my car to ask for directions when the man started screaming at me to remain in the car until further instructed to move on. I could tell that he took his job seriously by the way he held his clipboard up for me to witness him scribbling judiciously on the paper. His tongue was poking between his lips, and a serious frown had formed between his eyebrows. "Yellow line!" He snapped at me, pointing at my tyres. He took out a tape measure and measured the distance my tyres were from his yellow line. He wrote the result down on his paper, then began shaking his head in disbelief at my stupidity. "Can't you read?" he asked me like a schoolteacher, reprimanding a truant child. "What am I supposed to be reading?" I asked. Most people are little shits when they are growing up, and most of them manage to grow out of their dung heap just enough not to be a bother towards others, but this barnyard fowl was a complete shit, which is the highest level one can achieve in shitdom, a real manure marvel. The management had put him in charge of the front area of the compound. They even gave him a pen and a clipboard as a sign of importance. "Just roll your vehicle forward until I tell you to stop." "You think you can manage that, old fellow?" "One more crack like that and I'll be pulling you by your old fellow," I snapped back. After that remark, he gave me a discerning look and wrote something into his notes. I rolled the car slowly forward, following the motion of his hand until he put his hand up, indicating for me to stop. To my surprise, 4 wolves came up from the ground and encircled my car, whereby a spray from some very powerful jets soaked my car with a bubbly solution. After the washing down ceremony came a jet blast to equal the blast of a plane taking off. The wolves slipped back down into their compartments, and the irritated man with the clipboard swiped his now gloved finger across my bonnet and then wrote something into his notes. "Drive to Unit B, then wait for further instructions." "What was all that washing about?" I ventured to ask. "Hoof and mouth disease," he replied knowledgeably, rocking on the heels of his shiny black shoes, proud that he was able to show off the level of his intelligence. "Sorry to hear that, mate. I'm sure they will find a cure for you one day." With that, I drove on toward my next morning challenge. When I arrived at the B block, I found a giant letter B on a roller door with a sign that read, "Park your car diagonally to the curb, then proceed inside with your enquiry." Another sign inside in bold black lettering stated quite categorically, "Please read and obey all signage. Any abuse, either verbal or physical, towards our staff will not be tolerated, and in the event of violent behaviour, you could receive a criminal record for life." Once inside, I saw a sign that directed me to follow the yellow line and wait to be processed. I walked down a narrow hallway following the yellow line for a good minute. Eventually, I came to another sign that ordered me to stop and wait behind the yellow line. There was a man and 2 women seated behind a glass partition, all with their heads down, looking busy. After what seemed like an eternity, the man seated in the middle of the 2 women said something to me through the glass, but I couldn't make out what he said. I could see he was repeating himself, but I still couldn't make out his words, so I moved closer to the glass partition. I probably would have heard him better if it hadn't been for the blaring siren making an ungodly racket overhead. When I looked over at the man, he and the 2 women were cowering down on the floor behind their chairs. A security guard came running down the hallway, wiping cream from his mouth with one hand, while his other hand was grasping for the gun in his holster. "Get back behind the yellow line. Now! I quickly did as he instructed and returned to the magic yellow line. I'm sorry, but I can't make out what the man is saying. I can't hear through solid objects. Ask my wife. The guard ignored my pleas and began running a metal detector across my body, checking for whatever his mind had conjured up. Are you carrying any weapons or explosives? Do you think, if I were going to blow you up, that I would tell you about it beforehand? Wouldn't I want it to be a surprise? I could tell that he wasn't in the habit of listening to members of the public by the way he ignored my verbal response and went to the window to reassure everyone that I was unarmed. To be ready for any future trouble, he took a seat in the corner behind me. His hand was now welded to the butt of his gun. You could see he was just itching for me to take my feet off his precious yellow line. The three people returned to their seats, and the man in the middle opened a small square window hidden in the glass wall. He sat back in his chair and asked, "What can I do for you?" "I've come to pick up a parcel. You'd better hurry before Quick Draw over there puts a bullet into my back," I replied. "Don't worry about him," said the man. "He only carries blanks." "Too bad his father couldn't have been persuaded to do the same thing," I said jokingly. My audience on the other side of the glass ignored my attempt at subtle humour. "Have you got the order number?" "Yes," I said, holding up the only document I possessed. "Before I can release your goods, you have to have that document stamped by the officer from Incoming Goods. We don't have one of those officers in this building." The woman on his left looked over at him and whispered something to him. The woman on his right was busy stamping documents. "Where do I find one of these officers?" "There should be one in one of the grey buildings outside." The man pointed over my shoulder at an invisible object. I turned to leave and noticed the security guard staring at me, ready to pounce on the slightest infraction of his sacred yellow line. I suppose everyone must have something important to do in their lives. A simple yellow line was what put the spark into this man's life, giving it meaning. It had become his reason for getting out of bed in the morning. I'll bet he would be the life of the party when people were comparing their jobs. "I'm a neurosurgeon. I'm the US ambassador to the United Nations. And what do you do all day long to earn a crust?" "Why, the most important job of all jobs. I guard a little yellow line against trespassers. None shall pass." At the first grey building, I found a man banging two metal bars together. From what I could tell, he wasn't achieving much more than creating a loud noise. "Excuse me," I said, holding my hands over my ears. "I'm looking for the Goods Incoming office." He stopped banging and pointed one of his bars toward the building I'd just come out of. "It's over there." "Have you worked here very long?" I inquired. "About 35 years. He gave me a toothless grin, then went back to his banging. I decided to try the next building, but every time I tried talking to anyone, I was directed to take a number and join a queue. So, I took a number and waited in the queue for half an hour. When my number was finally called, I approached the desk of a very nice lady. She also directed me back from whence I came. I spent 3 hours in extreme heat looking for someone that I was constantly told was in the building I started in. I had little choice but to return to the building and gather more information. When I returned to the desk, the first thing I noticed was that the glass partition was gone. Perhaps I was in the wrong room. No, the same two women were in their seats, busy chattering away with one another. The man had disappeared, probably gone to lunch, I presumed. I had spent all the morning chasing a ghost. When I finally caught the eye of the lady to my left, I waved my hand to get her attention. "Can you please come closer so I can hear you?" she said warmly. Well, that was better. I had a quick glance down at my feet to see where the yellow line was, but there was no yellow line under my feet or behind me, for that matter. I approached the seated lady and gave her my order form. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't find the officer for the Goods Incoming. And believe me, I tried every building outside. Without stopping her idle chatter with the other lady, she wrote down the order number, then went over to the second lady's desk, picked up her stamping machine from her desk, banged it down onto the paper I had given her, then she handed it back to me. "Never once looking in my direction," she said. "Go to E Block and collect your goods." I took my stamped form and left the building. It was now 1300. I knew where to find the E Block as I'd already done a reconnaissance mission earlier in the morning. I found the same bloke I'd talked to earlier. He seemed a friendly sort, full of youthful enthusiasm and willingness to please. However, it was his lunch break, and nothing short of an Act of Parliament could budge a fully paid member of the Harbourside Dockers. They were one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, union organisations in Australia. I waved my stamped form in front of his face and asked if he wouldn't mind bringing my parcel out from storage. He showed no sign of recognition or the earlier displayed enthusiasm. He was busy stuffing a tuna sandwich into his mouth that worked like a garbage compactor when he talked. "Can't, mate. My break ends at 1400. While you wait, you can bring your car up to the door, and when I'm finished, I'll get your load. How good is that?" How could I be angry at such a nice young fellow? I returned to my car only to find the man from the front gate leaning against it.